and that ministers will always need to respond to events in the UK and around the world. However, it is frustrating for honourable members on both sides of the House when major planned announcements are scheduled during periods when the House is not sitting, particularly towards the end of recess. Whilst I appreciate the government informing me directly on developments on some of these issues, that does not substitute informing the House. If announcements made towards the end of last week had been held over the weekend, then honourable members would have had the first opportunity to question the Secretary of State on it, rather than learning about it through the media. Ministers should come to the House to announce their policies in the first instance, if that means waiting a few days. And the excuse that we may have an election elsewhere in the world is not my concern, because it is the elected members in this House on both sides that I represent. Secretary of State David Lammy.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful for your instructions at the beginning of this statement, and with permission I will make a statement on the conclusion of negotiations on the exercise of sovereignty over the British Indian Ocean Territory. On Thursday, the 3rd of October...
Order. I've done the bidding. I don't need others to come in on the back of it. Secretary of State.
I'm very grateful, Mr. Speaker. On Thursday, the 3rd of October, my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister and Mauritian Prime Minister Juggernaut, made a historic announcement. After 2 years of negotiations and decades of disagreement, the United Kingdom and Mauritius have reached a political agreement on the future of the British Indian Ocean Territory. Mr. Speaker, the treaty is neither signed nor ratified, but I wanted to update the House on the conclusion of formal negotiations at the earliest opportunity. Members will appreciate the context. Since its creation, the territory and the joint UK-US military base on Diego Garcia has had a contested existence. In recent years, the threat has risen significantly. Coming into office, the status quo was clearly not sustainable. A binding judgment against the UK seemed inevitable, and it was just a matter of time before our only choices would have been abandoning the base altogether or breaking international law. Mr. Speaker.
Order. You'll all be able to question the Secretary of State, so please just wait for that moment. No, we don't. You've been here long enough to know they don't come at this stage. Good try, but not working. Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, if you oppose the deal, which of these alternatives do you prefer? Doing this deal on our terms was the sole way to maintain the full and effective operations of the base into the future. Mr. Speaker, this is why in November 2022, the then Foreign Secretary, the Right Honourable Member for Braintree, initiated sovereignty negotiations. It's also why, Mr. Speaker, my predecessor, Lord Cameron of Chipping Norton, ultimately continued with those deals. Mr. Speaker, under the previous government, there were 11 rounds of negotiations. The last one held just weeks before the general election was called.
Exactly.
So in July, this government inherited unfinished business where the threat was real and inaction was not a strategy. Inaction posed several acute risks to the United Kingdom. First, it threatened the UK-US base, from countering malign Iranian activity in the Middle East to ensuring a free and open Indo-Pacific. It's critical for our national security. Without surety of tenure, no base can operate effectively nor truly deter our enemies. Critical investment decisions already being delayed. Second, it impacted on our relationship with the United States. who neither wanted nor welcomed the legal uncertainty and strongly encouraged us to strike a deal. Mr. Speaker, I am a transatlanticist. We had to protect this important relationship. And third, it undermined our international standing. We're showing that what we mean is what we say on international law and our desire for partnerships with the Global South. This strengthens our arguments when it comes to issues like Ukraine or the South China Sea. And Mr. Speaker, further legal wrangling served nobody's interests but our adversaries. In a more volatile world, a deal benefited us all, the UK, the United States and Mauritius. This government therefore made striking the best possible deal a priority. We appointed Jonathan Powell as the Prime Minister's Special Envoy for these negotiations, and he's worked closely with a brilliant team of civil servants and lawyers. Their goal was a way forward which serves UK national interests, respects the interests of our partners and upholds the international rule of law. This agreement fulfills these objectives. It is strongly supported by partners, with President Biden going so far as to applaud our achievement within minutes of the announcement. Secretary Blinken and Secretary Austin have also backed this successful outcome, which reaffirms our special defence relationship. And the agreement has been welcomed by the Indian government and commended by the United Nations General Secretary General. In return for agreeing to Mauritian sovereignty over the entire islands, including Diego Garcia, the UK-US base has an uncontested long-term future. Base operations will remain under full UK control well into the next century. Mauritius will authorise us to exercise their sovereign rights and authorities to respect Diego Garcia. This is initially for 99 years, but the UK has the right to extend this. And we have full Mauritian backing for robust security arrangements, including preventing foreign armed forces from accessing or establishing themselves on the outer islands. The base long-term future is therefore more secure under this agreement than without it. If this were not the case, I doubt the White House, State Department or Pentagon would have praised the deal so effusively. This agreement will be underpinned by a financial settlement that's acceptable to both sides. Members will be aware the government does not normally reveal payments for our military base overseas, and so it would be inappropriate to publicise further details of these arrangements at this stage. Mr. Speaker, the agreement also recognises the rights and wrongs of the past. The whole House would agree that the manner in which Chagosians were forcibly removed in the 1960s was deeply wrong and regrettable. Mauritius is now free to implement a resettlement programme to islands other than Diego Garcia. The United Kingdom and Mauritius have also committed to support Chagosians' welfare, establishing a new trust fund capitalised by the UK and providing additional government support to Chagosians in the UK. And the UK will maintain the pathway for Chagosians to obtain British citizenship. Furthermore, Mauritius and the UK will now establish a new programme of visits to the archipelago for the Chagosians. This agreement also ushers in a new area of our relations with Mauritius, a Commonwealth nation and Africa's leading democracy. We have agreed to intensify cooperation on our shared priorities, including security, growth and the environment. The agreement ensures continued protection of these islands' unique environment, home to over 200 species of coral and over 800 species of fish. And finally, Mr. Speaker, I want to reassure the House and all members of the UK family worldwide that this agreement does not signal any change in policy to Britain's other overseas territories. British sovereignty on the Falkland Islands, Gibraltar and the sovereign base areas is not up for negotiation. The situations are not comparable. This, Mr. Speaker, has been acknowledged across our overseas territories. Fabian Picardo, Chief Minister for Gibraltar, vocally supported this agreement, stating that there is no possible read across to Gibraltar on the issue of sovereignty. And similarly, the Governor of the Falklands has confirmed that the historic context of the Chagos Islands and Falklands are very different indeed. The government remains firmly committed to modern partnerships with our overseas territories based on mutual consent. After Mauritius' elections, the government will move towards treaty signature, and it is then our intention to pursue ratification in 2025 by submitting the treaty and the bill to this House for scrutiny. This is a historic moment, a victory for diplomacy. We've saved the base. We've secured Britain's national interests for the long term. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Foreign Secretary Andrew Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am grateful to the Foreign Secretary for sharing his statement with me in advance. Mr. Speaker, when the world is more dangerous than at any point in our lifetimes, when the Middle East is now on the edge of serious conflict, when there is war in Europe, and when British military forces are engaged in protecting an ally from Iranian missiles, the government proposes to give away a key strategic military asset to a state which has never controlled it and to which the Chagosian people feel little affinity, if any. It is frankly, Mr. Speaker, astonishing that this announcement was slipped out at the end of last week, a few days before Parliament returned in order to advantage the election timetable of the governing party in Mauritius, rather than by making a statement here in this House. The Times newspaper put it well, and I quote, that in a dangerous world, British security is being risked by ministers and departmental lawyers who believe appeasing faux anti-colonial sentiment in the UN matters more than national interest. Mr. Speaker, UK sovereignty has applied to the British Indian Ocean Territory for more than 200 years. Its strategic location, right in the centre of the Indian Ocean, is unmatchable, and it houses our one and only military base in the Indo-Pacific. I can tell the House, Mr. Speaker, that this is a deal that the former Foreign Secretary, my noble friend Lord Cameron, would never have done. And nor, for that matter, would my right honourable friend, the member for Braintree. Had they been willing to do so, then the deal, Mr. Speaker, would have been concluded long ago. The Conservative government declined to enter into a deal with Mauritius for reasons that I think are now clear for the House to see. Nor has the Labour government published a draft treaty, only a non-legally binding joint statement. So we are somewhat in the dark about exactly what has been agreed. And crucially, can the Foreign Secretary guarantee that there will be a vote on this treaty? Mr. Speaker, is it not the case that the noble Lord West of Spithead, the most senior military figure ever to hold office in a Labour government, said as follows: "There is an irrefutable case that ceding the Chagos Islands to Mauritius would be an irresponsible act which will put our strategic interests in danger, while also recklessly undermining fundamental principles of international law." So I would be most grateful if the Foreign Secretary could answer the following 5 questions. First, never mind what the First Minister said, first, what steps has he and the government taken to reassure the people of Gibraltar and the Falkland Islands that this ill-advised decision will have no effect on their sovereignty? Second, and of yet greater importance, what steps is he taking to make clear that this decision will have no read-across for the sovereign-based areas in Cyprus, Episcopi, Dhekelia and Akrotiri? Third, what assurances has he received that no Chinese military assets will be placed on any of the nearby islands in the archipelago? While his words are welcome, the House needs to see the wording clearly set out. Fourth, precisely how much money in total are we now planning that British taxpayers should pay to Mauritius, and for each year under this deal, as well as in total? We want full transparency on all payments that the government intends to make and what the money is for. What are the payments for the privilege of giving it away? Fifth, what consultations has he undertaken with the Chagosian community in this country and elsewhere? We note that his honourable friend, the Member of Parliament for Crawley, with courage and integrity, has opposed this deal. It remains to be seen whether others on the benches opposite will have the good sense, courage and integrity so to do. And in view of the fact that Jonathan Powell has only just been appointed as the special envoy for these negotiations, can he assure the House that the government has actually given the time to draw upon his expertise? Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary are proposing to give away Britain's key strategic assets in the Indian Ocean. Little or no attention has been paid to the position of those with direct heritage and family links to Chagos themselves. We have no clear details of any safeguards to be put in place against China, a close ally of Mauritius, setting up military facilities and surveillance capacity not far away. Mr. Speaker, by this statement today, the government gives succour to our enemies in a dangerous world and undermines the strategic web of Britain's defence interests. Mr. Speaker, our country is the poorer and the less for it.
Secretary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've got to say it takes some brass neck to criticise this government for delivering what they tried and failed to do. It was quite literally the last government that opened these negotiations in the first place because they understood what was at risk. And they went through 11 rounds of negotiations and resolved nothing. Instead, as with much as we found across government, they left it for us to inherit and to fix. He praised and aided the former Foreign Secretary and the member for Braintree, now auditioning for the Tory leadership, who seems to have suffered short memory loss in the last few years. He told the Commons that in negotiations with Mauritius, and I quote, "Our primary objective is to ensure the continued effective operation of our defence facility on Diego Garcia." That is exactly what we delivered. Don't take my word for it. Ask President Biden. Ask Secretary Blinken. Ask Secretary Austin. If this could win the approval from the White House and the Pentagon for protecting security interests, then I think the right honourable member can rest easy and put down some of the bombast. The reality is that if you don't support this agreement, you either support abandoning the base or breaking international law. So I ask him, which is it? Our agreement secures the base. It stops a potentially dangerous illegal migration route. It protects the marine areas. It provides new support for the Chagosians, and it ensures that the UK is compliant with international law. There was a time when the Tories believed in international law. Now they seem to have given up, telling other people basically they should go ahead and break it. The honourable gentleman knows that this was a serious negotiation begun by the last government, left to us to conclude. It secures the future of a very important security asset in the Indian Ocean. They posture, we lead. And of course, Parliament will get the scrutiny that it deserves in the coming months. He knows too that this was a negotiation between two governments, and of course we kept the Chagosians informed all along the way.
Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Emily Thornberry. Much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And in a parallel reality, may I ask the Foreign Secretary a question about a particular aspect of this treaty, which I don't believe is going to get a great deal of attention in all the heat and fury, and it's very important. At a time when our oceans have never been under such stress, the British Indian Ocean Territory is one of the last ocean wildernesses in the world, with tuna trawlers lining up on the boundary of the no-take zone, trying to entice fish across into their nets. Yep. Artisanal fishing of the Chagosians who have come home is quite possible within this ecosystem, but not licensing fishing. And any break in environmental protection will lead to a huge spike in illegal fishing. Could the Foreign Secretary inform the House what provision has been made to ensure the ongoing protection of this unique part of the world once the administration of the islands is handed over to Mauritius, and what involvement the Chagosians have had in this process?
Very good. Very grateful to my right honourable friend, and I want to reassure her that we, of course, will do everything we can and have done everything we can, which includes combating illegal fishing to better secure the environment. And as part of the deal, there is absolutely the establishment and the management of a new marine protected area, and we will work and continue to work with the Mauritians on that marine protected area, and of course the United States will play its part as well. I'm very grateful for the question.
Lib Dem spokesperson Callum Miller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Foreign Secretary for advance sight of his statement. Liberal Democrats welcome the effort to comply, 5 years on from the ICJ ruling, with the advice of the Court, while protecting our national security interests at a time of global insecurity. But we want to put on record our concerns about the way in which this process was conducted, and the risk that it bakes into a new treaty the historic injustices faced by the Chagosian people. The voice of the Chagosians has been excluded throughout the negotiations and the outcome. This is deeply regrettable. The UK rightly believes in the principle of self-determination, and yet there has been no opportunity for the self-determination of Chagosians. I met today with Maxwell Evernor, a Chagosian living in Crawley who is desperate to return to the islands. Maxwell said to me, "All we have is our voice, but that has been silenced for so long." Can the Foreign Secretary set out the ways in which the voices of Chagosians can be injected into the process, even at this late stage? This House was too often bypassed under the former Conservative government, and so I welcome the Foreign Secretary's assurance that there will be proper parliamentary oversight of the final treaty. Finally, may I also express my concern at some of the language used by those on the benches of the official opposition in response to this announcement. There is no equivalence between the Chagos Islands and other British overseas territories. We must be absolutely clear about that, and I hope the Foreign Secretary will affirm this. For some Conservative members to entertain the idea that Gibraltar or the Falkland Islands are in some sense at risk is to play into the hands of those who do not share Britain's interests. We in this House must speak with one voice when it comes to Britain's sovereign overseas territories.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I thank the spokesperson for the Liberal Democrat for raising the plight of the Chagosians. The way in which the Chagosians were treated in the 1960s was wrong and is a matter of immense regret, and he's absolutely right to raise those issues. He will know too that this was a negotiation between two state parties, as is the way in relation to this, and we sought to keep the Chagosians informed along the way, and it's my belief that the last government also sought to do that. And I want to reassure him that a trust fund has been set up to ensure that Chagosians are able to get that support. Chagosians are also able to apply to this country for citizenship. And whilst there is not one view amongst the Chagosian groups, because he'll recognise that there are Chagosians in the Seychelles, there are Chagosians in Mauritius, and there are Chagosians in the United Kingdom, hard to get one view, we will continue to do all we can to support them. Very grateful.
Tan Desi.
Much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I acknowledge the Foreign Secretary's words of trying to right an historic wrong and how this will help to improve relations with the Global South. And I also note the words of support from our closest ally, the US President. However, what mechanisms have been put in place to ensure that the strategic defence importance of the US-UK base remains after the expiration of this deal? And also, how will we ensure that the voice of the Chagosians, who have never been under Mauritian government control, how will that be central in any future arrangement?
Very grateful to the chair of the Defence Committee, and let me just say that in relation to the Global South, that he too will have seen that the government of India welcomed the agreement, and India committed to remaining to working with Mauritius and like-minded partners, including the United Kingdom. This was important. I should also say to him that the agreement that has been struck can be extended upon completion of the lease. And as I said before, we are committed to working with the Chagosians, and that is why we have a trust fund set up. And of course, now that Mauritius, effectively on completion of the treaty, will be in charge, they are saying that they will work with the Chagosians on resettlements on islands, not Diego Garcia, but some of the other islands in surrounds.
Andrew Rossendale.
Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a shameful day for British democracy. This is a dark moment for human rights in the United Kingdom. Already the people of the Chagos Islands have been forcibly removed from their homeland. Today, this government is handing their home over to a foreign country in cahoots with a hostile nation. The Foreign Secretary must commit to allowing the Chagosians, the British Chagosian people, the right of self-determination, just as we afford to every other British overseas territory. Are the people of Chagos Islands of less worth than the Falkland Islanders or the Gibraltarians or any other British overseas territory? Will he commit to allow the people of the Chagos Islands to decide their own destiny?
I think the honourable gentleman knows better than this, having chaired the all-party group on Mauritius. He knows that these discussions begun under the last government. He also knows, and will have read the ICJ judgment, he knows that it's important that this deal was struck. The last government left it to us to do, and we did it, and we're proud of it.
Sean Davies.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the words that are said in this House really do bear a huge amount of weight, particularly for those citizens in Gibraltar and in the Falkland Islands. Can the Foreign Secretary very clearly set out there's nothing in this agreement or in this statement today that affects their settled status and their self-determination?
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for that question, and of course I agree with him wholeheartedly.
Sir Ian Duncan-Smith.
Can I just say to the honourable gentleman that even when I was over there, I was opposed to what my government was doing, even though they were only going to go halfway. The truth is, he supported that then. Why has he turned around? And the one point I want to make to him and other colleagues sitting on the bench, the Mauritian government is guilty of vast human rights abuses, locking up other politicians who were independent, and also the Black Creole Mauritians were literally traduced by that government. We've handed to them, therefore, the rights over what the Chagosians have never agreed to. So my question to him is really, why was this a rush just before their election? They will use this now to benefit themselves in the re-election process. Why do we do that? To support a disgusting government in league with the Chinese?
I say to the right honourable gentleman, who has immense experience in this House, and this House knows that sometimes across the floor one's able to strike up friendships and we're fellow Spurs supporters, but let me say to him that this is a country that is part of our Commonwealth. And so I can't possibly associate myself with the remarks that he just made. This was an important... let us be clear that I think it is a matter of regret what was done to the Chagosians back in the 1960s. That has been a sore that has run through our relations with Mauritius, but also with substantial parts of the global south, and that is why we have struck this agreement and continued negotiations. I remind him, 11 rounds. He may well have disagreed with the last government, but 11 rounds that they undertook.
Gardner.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On the penultimate day of the last Labour government, David Miliband, then the Foreign Secretary, created the Marine Protected Area around the British Indian Overseas Territories. It was then the largest area anywhere in the world that had been protected. And my honourable friend knows, my right honourable friend knows, that the last time a prosecution was made for illegal fishing in that area was in 2020, 4.5 years ago. And the way in which it was conducted meant that £10,000 fine was levied against the vessel, a mere slap on the wrist. These vessels take hundreds of thousands of pounds of fish out of that marine protected area. Who is going to pay, and how much is the government committed to ensuring that that marine protected area continues to exist? Who will pay it, and how will they ensure that the minimal level of protection that currently is in place is increased?
Well, I know how my right honourable friend has championed these issues for many, many years. Can I reassure him that this was an issue of intense discussion under the last government and this government? We recognise the importance of that marine protected area, and of course, when he sees the provisions of the treaty come forward, we can have a further discussion on that surety.
Nigel Farage.
Thank you. Foreign Secretary, it would appear that the potential judgment, next judgment of a spurious, rather political foreign court matters more than the issue of national sovereignty. And you boast that President Biden likes this deal. Now, the Speaker earlier on said that this House should not be affected by elections that take place in foreign countries. But I wonder, how confident are you, if the 47th President of the USA becomes Donald Trump, that he will approve of this deal, given the importance of our relationship with America?
Yeah. Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for his question. Let me reassure him that we have sought to take views across the US political establishment. But I do say to him, to get a US president, a US Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs and Defence, applaud this agreement, should reassure him that the US would do nothing that would help our enemies, particularly the Chinese, in this regard.
Amanda Martin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can the Minister confirm that despite others trying to score cheap political points and recklessly scaremonger those residents in our other overseas territories, confirm that this government is completely committed to supporting the right of self-determination of the people of Gibraltar and the Falklands? Thank you.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend who chairs the all-party group, I think, on Gibraltar. We unequivocally support the right of both the Gibraltar and the Falkland Islands to self-determination. And I was very pleased to see the Chief Minister come out categorically and put down some of the false statements that were being made last week.
Tom Tugendhat.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The old principle that we used to apply was the Wilson principle, the principle of self-determination, that the Foreign Secretary may remember is the defence of the Falkland Islands, the defence of Gibraltar. He's now just violated that principle by undermining the rights of the Chagosian people in favour of a claim that was abandoned in 1965, never really made, because it was only administrative and never properly governed from Mauritius anyway, and in favour of a court whose judgment was advisory. He sold out the sovereignty of the British people. Truly, nobody apart from a boy called Jack has ever made a worse deal on the way to market. He's come back with a handful of beans that he's trying to sell as a prize.
I've got to say, I have always admired the honourable gentleman's eloquence, but I haven't always admired his principles. He was part of the last government. Did he raise this when he was part of the last government? Did he make it a resignation issue? No, he didn't, because he knows we inherited this and we had to make a deal.
Fred Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I begin by congratulating the party opposite for their sudden interest in national security? And they must have forgotten all about the millions and millions of Russian rubles swilling about their bank accounts. But I do have a question for the Foreign Secretary, if I may. And I want to ask a question on behalf of my constituents in Plymouth, but also the constituency of the Royal Marines community in the UK. And the Falklands and Gibraltar represent something really personal and special to anyone who served in the Navy or the Royal Marines. These are places which hold a real emotional weight. Not only does it say Gibraltar across the Royal Marines cap badge, but it's written across our hearts. Can the Foreign Secretary please assure that constituency of what this government's plans are as regards the Falkland Islands and Gibraltar? Thank you.
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for raising this issue, for his service and the seriousness with which he puts his remarks. And I can give him that unequivocal assurance for the Falklands, for Gibraltar, for Cyprus, and the rights that exist. This situation, which in the British Indian territories is completely different, not comparable. And I regret that in a way this has been made against the backdrop of a Conservative leadership contest, and colleagues who know a lot better have sought to make partisan points with something so important.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Did the government take the trouble to consult the head of its own strategic defence review, Lord Robertson of Port Ellen, before announcing this decision? And if so, what did Lord Robertson say? The SDR is supposed to report early next year. Would it not have been more sensible to see what its findings were before taking a militarily risky decision like this?
Well, can I say that this is a deal that secures the future of the base beyond the lifetime of anyone currently in this Parliament, and can be extended. That is why it's been welcomed by the Secretary of Defence in the United States, and I would have thought that a former head of NATO, of course, welcomes this deal, because it secures the base and our national security and the national security of the global community.
Gregor Poynton.
Deputy Speaker, thank you very much, Foreign Secretary. Can the Foreign Secretary confirm that the vital operations on the base on Diego Garcia will remain completely unaltered and without disruption thanks to this agreement?
Very grateful to my honourable friend. Absolutely, yes, I can.
Dr. Al Pinkerton.
Mr. Speaker, over the last 210 years, Chagosians have been traded, they've been deprived of their liberty, they've been deprived of their dignity, they've been displaced from their homeland, and now, thanks to this process, they face the prospect of being dispossessed from both their islands and from their future hope of self-determination. Chagosians are not children. They do not require and they do not ask for a trust fund. They're a proud community of many thousands of people who have been wronged time after time and who are looking today to the Foreign Secretary, to the UK and to the members of this House to ensure that their right to self-determination is understood and respected. Many of those Chagosians are outside right now. Can you offer them that reassurance and think again on this negotiation?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that the way that the Chagosians were treated was wrong, and this deal secures a right for settlement for them to the outer islands. He will know that there are a range of opinions amongst them, but he's absolutely right to put on record the manner in which they were treated, with this whole House, I would hope, would accept as a matter of immense regret.
Elaine Stewart.
Madam Deputy Speaker, does the Minister agree that the threat of illegal migration onto Diego Garcia carried the threat of creating a further smuggling route into the UK? Has that threat now been shut down?
Hear, hear. Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for raising a very serious issue. On the signing of that treaty, this now is a matter for Mauritius, so she's absolutely right to highlight that very important issue in terms of our own national security.
Edward Lee.
I don't know how many people actually have visited these islands in this chamber. Well, I went there with the Defence Select Committee 38 years ago.
Yes.
And it was crucial in our whole effort in the Cold War against the Soviet Union, and we never appeased once in that Cold War, and we won it. The question I want to ask, and it's a serious question, is given that Mauritius has a close relationship with China, given that we can't trust a single word the Chinese say with our experience on Hong Kong, given that they are militarizing islands all over the Pacific, are we absolutely sure that sometime in the future the Chinese will not exert pressure on the Mauritian government to have a base on these islands?
I've got to say, for such a senior member of the House of Commons, that I've got to tell the honourable gentleman that he should just check his facts a little bit more closely. Mauritius is one of only 2 countries in Africa that has not participated in China's Belt and Road. Mauritius is an ally of India, not China.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This government has committed to a reset of the UK's relationship with the Global South. Does the Foreign Secretary agree that putting this issue to bed will help neutralise the charge that the UK plays by double standards where international law is concerned?
Well, the honourable gentleman is absolutely right to raise this issue. Some will argue that the ICJ advisory opinion of 2019 was only advisory, and the UN General Assembly resolution of the 24th of May 2019 was not binding. But he will recognise that many of our closest allies voted against us on that occasion, and it is important that we are a country that upholds the rule of law. I am called to come to this dispatch box to make the case for standing with Ukraine and to make the case for international humanitarian law. And for all of those reasons, we must be a country that upholds the rules-based order.
Robert Jenrick.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We've just handed sovereign British territory to a small island nation which is an ally of China. Yes. And we are paying for the privilege. Yep. All so that the Foreign Secretary can feel good about himself at his next North London dinner party. In whose interests does he think he serves? Those of the global diplomatic elite, or those of the British people and our national interest?
Well, I hope that question may have garnered him a few more votes, but if that's his position, he's unlikely to lead the Conservative Party to victory. This deal secures the base. It is in our national interests. That is why it is a good deal, and I've got to say, that is why the President of the United States, the Defence Secretary in the United States, applaud and welcome this deal. What do they know about global national security that he doesn't.
Tim Rocker.
Deputy Speaker, it is fairly unseemly seeing a leadership race being conducted in the middle of a foreign policy debate, because that is what is happening. But does the Secretary of State agree with me that the clarity over the legal status of Diego Garcia, achieved through diplomacy with a Commonwealth partner, actually cements our influence in the Indo-Pacific?
Well, I'm hugely, hugely grateful, because the Commonwealth matters to this side of the House. It used to matter to that side of the House. And as we head to Chagos in Samoa, it's hugely important that we are a country that plays by the rules. That's why this agreement is so important.
Brendan O'Hara.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't think it will come as a huge surprise to anyone that, unlike the outraged masses on my right, I have absolutely no problem whatsoever with the principle of the United Kingdom divesting itself of what little remains of its colonial past. But can I ask the Minister about the involvement of the Chagosian people in this process, a people who he accepts have been treated shamefully by the United Kingdom and whose forced displacement is rightly regarded as a crime against humanity? Let him be absolutely clear, Madam Deputy Speaker. When did his government meet with the Chagosian people? What were the nature of the discussions that were had? And to what extent was the opinion of the Chagosian people represented in this deal?
Well, look, as I've said, this deal will mean that for the first time, Chagosians are able to resettle on the outer islands. As I've said already, this was a negotiation between the United Kingdom government and Mauritius. That was the nature of state agreement. And of course, we've sought to keep Chagosians informed. But I do remind him, and he knows this, there are a range of Chagosian groups, some in the Seychelles, some in Mauritius, some in this country.
Laura Kirksmith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The former Conservative Foreign Secretary, the Right Honourable Member for Braintree, when he was leading negotiations with Mauritius, said, "Our primary objective is to ensure the continued effective operation of our defence facility on Diego Garcia." This government has now delivered that. On that basis, shouldn't the Conservatives be welcoming this agreement?
Well, my honourable friend is completely right. But she knows that they've got a leadership contest on. This is a bit of a beauty parade, and it's why they're stepping away from a negotiation that they begun, had 11 rounds on, and failed to deliver.
Mark Francois.
Having heard the Foreign Secretary's performance this afternoon, we now know why they didn't dare announce this in the House of Commons. This abject surrender of British sovereign territory for nothing, for that's what it is, now risks a Chinese veto over an absolutely vital military facility. So can I ask the Foreign Secretary, how much in rent will this country now pay Mauritius for the right to lease back what's already ours, and which government department, the MOD or the FCDO, will pay the landlord?
The honourable gentleman mentions the Chinese veto. The Chinese do not have a veto in this House. The treaty will be scrutinised by this House. All members will be able to look at it, all members will be able to debate it and reflect on it. And of course, at the time of publishing the treaty, there will be a discussion of the costs. But I say to him, no basing agreements ever discuss costs, because that would damage our own national security, and this government's not prepared to do that.
Gordon McKee.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Given the previous government began these negotiations, does the Foreign Secretary agree with me that while members opposite may be more interested now in the views of Tory party members, that this government will always act in Britain's national interest?
And honourable friend is right. It used to be that the party opposite claimed to be a party of defence. This is an agreement that secures our national interests, defence and security interests, in an important part of the globe. It's shameful, frankly, to see them behaving as they are this afternoon.
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I just describe the right honourable gentleman as hopelessly naive? Has he not seen how the rule of law, the rule of international law across the world, is collapsing under the challenge from Russia, Iran, North Korea and China? And given a few flimsy pieces of paper, how much does he think that China or any of those other countries will respect it after we have given up the principle that this is British sovereign territory?
I've got to say, up against a tough geopolitical environment in which Russia, Iran, North Korea and China are far from playing by the global rules, it's hugely important that this country is a country that supports the rules-based order, and it's hugely important that this facility has been secured for longer than anybody else in this Parliament is able. That is what we've secured, and I have to say, I trust the judgment of our closest ally, not the honourable gentleman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the fact that an agreement has been reached over the Chagos Islands, which helps right a historic wrong and guarantees the security we need. Amongst the confected outrage from the benches opposite, we have heard the expected scaremongering over the future of other territories, including Gibraltar. I note that both the Foreign Secretary and the Minister for Europe have in recent months reaffirmed the double lock on Gibraltar sovereignty, meaning that not only will Gibraltarian sovereignty never be altered without its people's consent, but also that the UK government will never enter into the process of negotiation with which the Gibraltarian people are not content. Does this remain the case?
Well, he's absolutely correct, and my honourable friend, the Minister for Europe, communicated that with a letter to the Prime Minister just a few weeks ago. What we have seen in the last few days from the opposition has been wholly, wholly irresponsible.
Karen Bradley.
Much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Foreign Secretary has said that he's establishing a trust fund and that Chagosians will be able to apply for British citizenship. What discussions did he have with the Chagosian people about that, and can he confirm that the Home Office is ready to deal with those applications?
Can I say they already can apply for UK citizenship, and of course we have been in dialogue and discussions with the Chagosian. My honourable friend, the Minister for Overseas Territory, has met with them regularly.
Paul Brickell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that this agreement has no bearing on the government's relationship with the other overseas territories, and that the UK government's policy towards the Falkland Islands, Gibraltar and other territories remains unchanged, with support for their right to self-determination?
Self-determination is the key word, and we absolutely support the right of the people of the Falkland Islands and Gibraltar in that regard.
Sammy Wilson.
Coming from Northern Ireland, I'm not surprised that this government has surrendered British interests against the wishes of the people who live there, because after all they supported the deal which the previous government did in relation to EU demands on Northern Ireland. But the government has given away a strategic interest. It has not published the deal, it won't reveal the cost, it won't guarantee that Chinese influence in this strategic area will not be guaranteed, and also, of course, it's handed to a country which has no historic claim. Does he not recognise the impact that this has on other people who are eyeing British territory? The EU and Gibraltar, the Argentina and Falklands. But this is a dirty, dangerous and desperate deal. It's a shameful surrender of British interests. Is he relying on the fact that the government's got a huge sledgehammer majority
which can drive this through this House despite the impact that it has on long-term British interests.
I think the honourable gentleman lost much of the House when he said that people live there. They don't live there. That's the whole point. They don't live there. This is a deal that will give them the right to resettlement on the outer islands. I don't recognise the caricature that the honourable gentleman has made this afternoon.
Steve Race.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. President Biden has welcomed the agreement. Secretary Blinken has welcomed the agreement, as has Secretary Austin. Does the Minister agree with me that Tory critics opposite do not know more about US national security than the White House and the Pentagon?
I have to say to the honourable gentleman, he makes an important point, because he knows, as this whole House knows, that it doesn't matter who is in the White House or who is in number 10. For generations, the US and the UK have acted in consort. And the future of Diego Garcia has been central to that, central to the security of the Indo-Pacific and the wider Indo-Pacific, but central also to global security. And the capabilities across our nations are essential and important. And that's why it's so sad to see the Conservative Party falling, frankly, quite, not living up, frankly, to where they should be on these crucial issues of national security, which ought not to be partisan.
Dr. Andrew Murison.
Speaker, my old boss, Admiral Lord West of Spithead, won his Distinguished Service Cross in 1982 in the Falklands, and the right honourable gentleman will know he's a former Labour Security Minister. Why then does he think that Lord West is of the view that what the right honourable gentleman is doing poses a grave security risk to this country, and further is likely to undermine our position in the Falkland Islands? And will he give a straight answer to my right honourable friend, the member for New Forest East, in asking whether another noble lord, Lord Robertson, has been consulted in any way over the decision that the Foreign Secretary has made?
Yes. I would urge him to read the remarks of the Chief Minister of the Falkland Islands, and I would urge him to consult more widely the defence establishment in this country, who are pleased that an issue that was looking that would become very contentious between us and the United States in terms of global national security has now been settled.
Lord Arthur.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to thank the Secretary of State for his statement, and in particular the reassurances given to our brothers and sisters in Gibraltar and the Falkland Islands. I think the scaremongering around those two areas has been absolutely shameful, absolutely shameful. But in the spirit of trying to achieve cross-party consensus, I think it's really important. To acknowledge the work of the previous government on this subject and how that has provided the foundation for what we have today. Before then, progress was all too slow, and it did shame our country. Nonetheless, I want to give the Secretary of State opportunity again to reassure us that this deal is in our strategic interest and also the interests of our partners.
Well, there's seriousness, of course, behind the honourable gentleman's question, and I want to reassure him that alongside my colleague, the Defence Secretary, we have sought to secure a deal that secures the future of the base long after any of us are left in this chamber, that ensures that China particularly could not locate on any of the outer islands, as well, of course, as Diego Garcia. And I think that is why, in truth, the President, the Defence Secretary and the Secretary of State in the United States have welcomed this deal. But I also think it's important to recognise that India has welcomed this deal. They do not want China in their backyard.
Sir Desmond Swain.
How does the cost of leasing compare with the savings that the government is making on winter fuel allowance?
The honourable gentleman will be able to return to these issues when the treaty is before this House, and he must wait, as I do, for the budget of the Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Dame Caroline Dinage.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wonder if the Foreign Secretary would have a go actually answering a direct question. How much will the UK have to pay for the privilege of ceding our sovereignty?
Well, as I've said, these will be issues that can discuss when we have the treaty. When we have the treaty, it is not routine for any government to comment on basing arrangements. She would not expect us to do that and put our national interests at stake.
Oliver Ryan.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I wonder whether the Foreign Secretary agrees with me that this government's commitment to our populated British overseas territories is fundamental, unshakable and unbreakable. I'm glad to hear him make the statement that he's made today, and I think this is a good thing for Britain.
My honourable friend is right. There is an important distinction between the Indian Overseas Territories and Diego Garcia and, of course, Gibraltar and the Falklands, and that is, of course, that they are populated. The self-determination of those people is central to their future, and that's why the remarks that have been made over the last few days are wholly unacceptable and shameful.
Corbyn.
Madam Deputy Speaker, will the Foreign Secretary take this opportunity to recognise that what happened to the Chagosian people in the 1960s and 1970s was abominable, abusive, illegal and disgraceful, and many of them lived in poverty for many years after that in the Seychelles and in Mauritius. And they've long demanded their right to return to Diego Garcia and to the archipelago. That has been denied until now. And I think it should be right for the Home Secretary to pay tribute to those Chagosians that led that campaign for the right of return and the right of resettlement on their home islands. And an apology is due to the Chagosian people for the way they were treated. But could I also ask him about the situation facing Diego Garcia? It's unclear to me whether or not Chagosian people can visit, can reside, can stay there, can remain there, or are they going to be denied going there for another 140 years because of this deal that's been done with the USA? And finally, ask him this: why has the Americans been offered a 140-year lease as part of this deal? That is a very long time in recorded history of any sort. In fact, it's longer than most places have many countries have even existed. Can he explain that?
Well, I know that the Right Honourable Gentleman has been championing the plight of the Chagosians for many, many years in this House, and he makes his remarks with tremendous passion and strength, and he's right to do that. The way that they were treated was wrong, and in bringing forward the treaty in the months ahead, I will have more to say on that very matter. In relation to whether they will now have a right to visit Diego Garcia, I've got to tell him that they will not have such a right under this treaty. That any resettlement or visits will be to the outer islands. This is an important US-UK security base, and so I'm afraid I'm not able to give him that assurance. They do not have that right under this treaty.
Calvin Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I don't believe I ever had the pleasure of flying into our joint base on Diego Garcia, either in the US Air Force or as a pilot in our own Royal Air Force, but its strategic value in terms of its capabilities that it offers and its relationship that it cements with our US partners is clear, as was its contested existence. Does my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, agree with me that it was a Tory government that started these negotiations because they recognised the dangerous situation facing the base, and that it was this Labour government has now ensured the base is undisputed and has a secure footing?
Well, I'm grateful to my dear friend. And let me just say thank you for your service And you're absolutely right to raise the issue of these islands being contested and this agreement now putting them beyond contestation. And that makes us all more secure as a result. And I think he knows because of his service. And I think that most of the general public knows, those that have paid attention to this recognise that this is a deal that we in the United Kingdom can be proud of.
Paul Holmes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I say to the Foreign Secretary that after that performance, I'm delighted to read that there will be a reshuffle at Christmas.
Yeah.
The Foreign Secretary should revisit his statement where he said that my noble friend Lord Cameron carried on these negotiations. I was his parliamentary private secretary when he ended these negotiations.
Yep.
This Foreign Secretary capitulated in 3 weeks. Can I therefore ask him, in the sham negotiation that he's carried out, that no military equipment will be allowed to be stationed not only on the outer islands but on the inner islands under this agreement over the 99 years? And can I ask him to outline to this House, because he's not managed to outline much to this House this afternoon, what scrutiny structures and how many votes we will be allowed in this House when he lays that treaty?
Yes to his question, and we will come forward with plans in due course.
Rupert Lowe.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In the Foreign Secretary's oral statement, he said a binding judgment against the UK seemed inevitable. That seems to me to be misleading verbal baby food at best. And at a time when, particularly as so far there's been a non-binding advisory opinion, there's been absolutely nothing which suggests we're going to breach any form of international law. But at a time when we have got increasing global conflict, I would like the Foreign Secretary to explain to the House why is there such urgency to do what he is proposing to do now. It seems to me it's going to be a case of acting in haste and repenting at leisure.
Can I say to the gentleman, it was precisely to put the base on a secure footing because of that global uncertainty that this deal was the right deal to do.
Griffith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have to say I am surprised by Labour's conversion to the merits of leasehold rather than the security of freehold ownership. I didn't think that was their position. But in addition, Madam Deputy Speaker, to being an unsinkable aircraft carrier, the British Indian Ocean Territory is host to unique capabilities for space observation. It's the only remote monitoring space in the southern hemisphere able to see parts of the sky to which we would otherwise be blind. At a moment when space is a heavily contested military domain, did the Foreign Secretary even know about these space monitoring capabilities? And what are his plans to secure alternatives to save our freedom and security?
Foreign Secretaries don't comment on such capabilities, but the House would have heard his remarks.
Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Given there is no dispute, I don't think, amongst the House that Diego Garcia is a vital, strategic, important base in the heart of the British Indian Ocean Territory, will the Foreign Secretary today undertake, when he publishes the details of the treaty provisions, to do 2 things? One, what will be the exclusion zone around Diego Garcia, how many miles? And 2, what provisions will be in the treaty to prevent any other foreign power establishing a sovereign military base in any of the archipelagos of the British Indian Ocean territories?
He's right to raise these issues, and there will be provisions that he can scrutinise in that regard in the coming months.
Jerome Mayhew.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Foreign Secretary has come to this House today with the smile of a favourite, having exchanged British sovereign territory for a 99-year lease from a Chinese ally, and he expects to be applauded for it. He claims in his statement that we can extend this lease. Can he inform the House whether that right is unilateral, and if so, by how many years will that extension be? And why does he think that this piece of paper is going to prevent Chinese encroachment?
Well, as I've already said, they are not a Chinese ally. They're one of 2 countries that's not participated in China's Belt and Road in the continent of Africa for a reason. They're an ally of India. They are not a Chinese ally. And I have to say, it's hard to take the honourable gentleman seriously if he can't even get his facts right.
Stuart Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We've heard of great interest of all these other countries the Foreign Secretary is looking to please. I'm interested about our country. I'm interested in what goes on in this House. Will the Foreign Secretary confirm that we will have a vote, and by what mechanism will that vote come to this House so we can have a say on our sovereignty and what we own? Absolutely.
The Honourable Gentleman is not new to this House. We will follow the usual process as you'd expect.
Wendy Morton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We saw a previous Labour government sell off this country's gold. We now have a Labour government that is surrendering our sovereignty and giving away our territory. On the specific point of the Chagosians, I'd like to ask the Foreign Secretary if and when he's had any specific discussions with the Chagosian people as part of these negotiations.
I've got to say, I am not going to take lectures from a party that left us a 22 billion black hole. A 22 billion black hole. They left us, and they left our public services in a state. The chutzpah of the party opposite is unbelievable.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Those of us who've had the privilege of visiting some of the overseas territories or meeting with their representatives here in Westminster are very much aware of how strong their loyalty and admiration is towards the United Kingdom. Even if they've heard what the Foreign Secretary said this afternoon, perhaps they're right to have a nagging doubt that that loyalty will not be returned, aren't they?
Yeah. Let me just say to the Honourable Gentleman, because there's seriousness, I cause behind his question. All of us believe in the right to self-determination. And I unequivocally am absolutely clear that the overseas territories remain an important part of our national story, and nothing we have done in this deal puts them in any jeopardy.
Alistair.
Given the exploitive response of Argentina in the context of the Falklands, isn't it clear that those with malevolent aspirations about British territory are drawing comfort from the belief created by this deal that this government is weak on the question of sovereignty? And doesn't that come off the back of the fact that Westminster, within the United Kingdom, surrendered sovereignty over 300 areas of law in Northern Ireland to a foreign parliament, namely the European Parliament? If the Foreign Secretary wants to demonstrate that his assurances to Gibraltar and the Falklands are to be taken seriously, then shouldn't he begin by reclaiming sovereignty over all of the United Kingdom and reversing the surrender of sovereignty over 300 areas of law in Northern Ireland?
Can I say to the Honourable Gentleman, we will always defend the Falkland Islands, and that point I raised with the Foreign Secretary for Argentina just last week in New York.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In the mid-1960s, Foreign Secretary, when Mauritius was granted independence, they agreed, as part of that deal, to relinquish all claims to this British sovereign territory that we've owned since 1814, the Treaty of Paris. Why do you see fit to do a deal with a nation that has reneged on a previous deal, and why are we selling a sovereign asset of great value that we all agree for no money up front? We're paying them. It's negligent.
Because we've done a deal that secures the security of the global community. And I've got to say, I can't recall if the Honourable Gentleman is legally qualified, but I've got to tell him that we found ourselves with no one supporting our claim in the family of the UN and the rules-based order, and for that reason the last government began these negotiations, and it's been absolutely right that we conclude them.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And the Foreign Secretary has made a very clear point, but Madam Deputy Speaker, in 1982 Margaret Thatcher set a precedent that the United Kingdom would do everything necessary to defend our overseas territories. So some 42 years later, it's important that these legacies are carried on. So can the Foreign Secretary commit to ensuring that this decision has no bearing on other overseas territories such as the Falklands or Gibraltar? I have many friends who live in the Falklands and Gibraltar. So what steps will be taken to protect and preserve them?
Yes, I can, and in that regard I'd want to associate myself with the remarks of the former Prime Minister and state once again that the right to self-determination governs our relationship with the overseas territories. They remain a very important part of our national story, and nothing in this deal undermines that important relationship, and that is why the Governor of the Falklands and Fabian Picardo in Gibraltar have been very clear about that in the last few days.
The honourable gentleman, I don't think, was standing throughout the statement. Can we just have a moment for the two front benches to swap